Thank you. Here we go.
So this is the third of our interfaith study. We continue studying Islam and now studying the Mormons. Sometimes people are curious, why are Mormons an interfaith study and not a Christian ecumenical study? Next week at the end of our class, I'll ask you whether they should be an ecumenical or an interfaith, and we'll see what you have to say. But that's a complicated question, because who is in charge of saying who is Christian and who is not? If you're Catholic, well, that's pretty clear, the concept. If you're Orthodox, that's pretty clear, the patriarch. For Protestants, it's a lot less clear. And we know that Christians have a lot of differences among themselves. For instance, Baptists, Anabaptists baptize only believers. We are Presbyterians, we believe in what's called pedo-baptism, we baptize infants. Is there going to be, are you going to announce your breast?
I was waiting for the right moment. You gave it. All right, go.
I'm the mother of boys, you can't get away with that. Yeah, that's not the sound you were hoping for. Anyway. So we have different beliefs, for instance, about how many sacraments there are, and, you know, so. But I think you'll find with the people about it, there are more and more extensive differences with all Christians, and so there has never been what we call a bilateral conversation. It's one church meeting with another church, and they recognize they have mutual recognition of standing as church. So we have Episcopal, Presbyterian, you know, usually or Orthodox, Protestant, and those take place all the time. But no one has ever afforded a bilateral to the Church of Jesus Christ, nor have they sought them. So,
No, they probably accept one.
well, we'll get to that. I'll tell you a little story. I was the chair, the Christian chair of a national council, the only one that I know of, the National Council of Churches and the LDS. And my partner was Elder Henry Iron, who was a general authority. That's the very high role church. But that was a conference of mutual understanding. That was not about that. So we'll talk about that sometime. We're going to begin with a Mormon prayer. And you'll notice that when every Mormon prayer begins, Heavenly Father, and that's a kind of a touchstone. It always is the salutation. Heavenly Father, we pray that thou will strengthen and sustain each of your spirit children as we begin this conference, we pray. Father, that our hearts and our minds will be open. We pray that the Spirit will be present, that it will bring into our hearts the messages that we need to receive. Amen. Very simple, but what do you notice? No, Jesus. No, Jesus. Father, Spirit. But we don't usually say that thou wilt strengthen us. Here in America in the 21st century, we say you will, not thou wilt. And that's a very important first learning about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Book of Mormon is written in that kind of King James kind of language. And so they continue to use that language in liturgy and in prayer. And so that language is maintained. In fact, it's the only place it's really maintained these days. I mean, the Brits don't talk like that anymore. We don't talk like that anymore. And there, you know, there's some interesting things about that. I mean, one of my favorite Christmas passages, and I always used to read it from King James, even up to my last year in my parish. And lo, they were in the fields abiding, shepherds watching over their sheep by night. And an angel of the Lord came upon them, and they were sore afraid. I mean, somehow that's just beautiful language. You know, it's just a beautiful language. So I will tell you that I have respect and affection for the monks. In a way that's so different. I was thinking about this yesterday. I was swimming and I was thinking about this. I do respect the Episcopalians and I like very much their common book of worship and so forth. But I wouldn't say I have affection for them. I have affection for the monks. That's easier to do if you don't live in Utah. And they are a curiosity. My degree is in American church history. This is an American-born tradition. So, you know, just intellectually, I like it. Like a musician, like a piece of music, even though it's not something popular, you like it because of its complexity or whatever. But it is a puzzle. So let's try to dig in. Today, I'm going to try to give us the background, and then next week we're going to work on doctrine. But let's begin here. It's, as I say, an American-born tradition. American Christianity, American religious faith, is a puzzle to people all over the world. In fact, I think I've told you before. I did a postdoc at St. Andrews, and when you do a postdoc, you do whatever you do. You're studying something. You teach something because that's what pays them for having you occupy their dorms and eat their food. You know? And so they had me teach American ecumenism because it is, I mean, in Scotland, you're Kirk of Scotland, or you're a Baptist, or you're an Anglican. Period. And if you're an Anglican, there's always a little sort of wariness of you because you're a Brit, really. And if you're a Baptist, well, there, dear. Things will get better. Yes. But, and if we go to the German states or Scandinavia, it's Lutheranism. But this idea that in America, if you don't like what's going on, you start a new denomination. And we tell them we have 232 denominations. How do you know which one you are? That's really a puzzle. So we have a lot of American-born traditions. The other one that you would know most prominently would be Pentecostalism, which is, of course, a Christian tradition. But this is a world religion, the only world religion established on North American soil. So that's kind of a marker. The name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They just refer to it as the church for reasons that we'll get to in a minute. The members are called Latter-day Saints or Saints. They refer to themselves as spirit children. All are spirit children of the living God. Now, if I were speaking of spirit children, I would probably mean elves or fairies, or actually, if I start talking about spirit children, heck, my alcohol. Maybe you put me to bed and see if I make more sense the next day. But spirit children. And the term Mormon comes from the angel Moroni, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it's not wrong and it's not offensive, but the more polite way is to refer to people as a Latter-day Saint. And it's one of the things, and you'll see my note on the study guide, one of the most difficult things about studying the LDS is words that mean something to us don't really mean the same thing. So when we say a saint, maybe we're thinking of Athanasius or Anselm or Saint Peter or Mother Teresa, now a saint. So, but saint to them means a church member. So it's a little confusing, and so you kind of have to stay on the top of your game. Mormons is a word like, I like to use this illustration. My family's Canadian. We call ourselves Canadians. Some people call us Canucks. That's not offensive, but it's not polite either. I mean, in polite circumstances, you'd say, my friend, the Canadian so-and-so. But it's friendly. Oh, I was sitting with a bunch of Canucks and we were talking about hockey. Probably what we're talking about. We're talking about Labatt's blue. Anyway, so Mormon is not a bad word, but more like saints. Their texts are the Book of Mormon, which its full title is The Book of Mormon, Another Testament of Jesus Christ, and it was published in 1830. Doctrines and Covenants, or sometimes it's called the DNC. They informally call it's a gynecological joke. But Doctrines and Covenants is a little bit like in Presbyterianism. We, of course, we have a Bible, the Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, and the Testaments of Jesus Christ. And then we have what we call the BOO, the Book of Order, which is kind of how our church is organized and what the rules are. And then we have a book of confessions, like the Barman Declaration or the contemporary, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed. These are confessions that are books of confessions of faith that we affirm. So the DNC is doctrines and covenants, or really those are commandments. So it's kind of the rule book, the doctrines and the rule books. By covenants, they mean, commandments. An example, about 15 years ago, the DNC about 20 years ago, was amended to say that both men and women could go on mission. Previously only men. About 15 years ago, it was amended to allow that persons of color could be saints and could be open to all the ministries, the elders and general authorities and so forth. As you see at the top there are 17 million LDS around the world. There are 7 million in the United States, and they have a remarkable 99,000 volunteer missionaries. If you wonder how the growth came, I refer you to the 99,000 missionaries. Now, by far and away, the one of the tensions in the LDS is there are far more non-American LDS than Americans. Yet all the authority resides among Americans. So you've got some built-in torque there. The last is of their, what we say, canonical text. You know this word canon. This is the only two N's, no third N. A canon, it's the authorized holy text that a body affirms. The third is the Pearl of Great Price, which is an assortment. If you remember when we studied Islam, the sayings of Muhammad, the prophet, or called the Hadith. Well, this is a collection, first of all, of the sayings of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. And then there are collected sayings of other prophets. The head of the church is called, hold your breath and for this one, is called the prophet, seer, and revelator. These are not words we use commonly. But
Prophet, what does it say?
seer, S-E-E-R, seer, wise one, and revelator. And I have talked with them about whether that is a divine office or not. And the answer is not quite clear. It's not, at least it's not clear to me. It's not quite like the holiness that attends the pontiff in Rome or the patriarch in Moscow, where, you know, Kirill, who was on the throne in Moscow for Russian Orthodoxy, is referred to as your holiness when you address him. So it's not quite like that, but there is something that is of some shade above ordinary human existence, prophet, seer, and revelator. And so the Pearl of Great Price has some, like Spencer Kimball was the president. First of all, the LES, because they live in such a healthy manner, they live 120. I mean, they're very old when they die. And the prophet and revelator, the more so. And Spencer Kimball, I think, was something like 110 when he died. And he was the prophet, seer, and revelator for 40 years, up until, I guess, the mid-90s or so. I could look up his years, but something like that. And he's the one that in our lifetime has been predominant. Prophet, seer, and revelator. You see that trips right off your tongue. Anyway,
That's how they address it? Or is that his title?
well, that's his title. But I met Spencer Kimball, and you know, when he said, Dr. Lindman, this is the prophet, seer, and revelator, Elder Spencer Kimball.
So you say elder or you say prophet, seer, revelator?
I just said it's a
I didn't say, expense.
yeah. Well, you know, I was on a payroll, you know, my JOB. But that brings me to a really interesting story. I went out to make the plans for this first conversation. And I was picked up at the airport by one of the elder Iring, who was one of the Council of 12, prophet, seer, and revelator, the forum, the Council of Elders, 12 of them, 12 apostles, and then the 70, the forum of the 70. That's the structure. Anyway, so Elder Iring picked me up. Elder Iring has an MBA from Harvard. He's very smart, very successful businessman. But Mormon life is so incredibly insular. He also had a woman named Darlene, Sister Darlene, with him. Men are called elders, women are called sisters. Sister Darlene, who was going to be with us all the time, the 3 days I was going to be in Utah, for my convenience. Because I might have questions that should not be appropriately discussed between a man and a woman. Where's the ladies' room? This is a cultural phenomenon, and until you get your mind around that, none of it makes sense. So it's a real kindness, and I like Sister Darlene very much. I mean, she was incredibly attentive, and And she's explaining things. There are some towns where there are places with liquor licenses. And those are called Gentile towns. It's the only place in the world where a Jew can be a Gentile. But she said to me, we were going to Provo one day, and she said, now there's a Gentile town right up here. You want to put some coffee? They don't drink coffee. Yes. Well, and she said, I could go in for you. I said, well, I'm happy to go in. Can I get you anything? Fine. Large copy.
That one, yes, the prohibition of coffee.
Caffeine.
You said alcohol, but.
Yeah.
Well, the expert,
And those
It's a skin on.
ginger ale's okay. Focus on.
and they don't really, the only beverages that I've had ever. Are. Lemonade is a big favorite. And it's something called fruit punch, which is, it tastes like somebody put a bunch of lollipops of every different flavor together and melted them. And then added water and then cooled it, and it's. I think I drank something like that at day camp. So, anyways, it's very weird and very sweet. And water and milk. Yeah, I mean, it is not unusual to sit at a dinner table with a bunch of grown-ups and everybody's got a glass of milk and. Hey, don't spill your milk. Anyway, I arrived in the airport, they greeted me. We did some things, they took me to see the temple and the tabernacle and the headquarters and stuff. And then, we went to a dinner at Elder Iron. This is a guy with the MBA from Harvard. Very successful businessman in Boston and in New York, where he's now back in Utah, where he grew up. And we had dinner, we had a nice conversation. Almost every Mormon home where that clock is would be a long painting of Jesus. Often it's like on a hillside with his arms extended. In the Bibles, you'll see that, you know, the brick hair, a very kind of specific kind of picture. And we had dinner, and we got to the end. I was seated opposite of Elder Iron, and at the end he said, you know, Reverend, and they called me Reverend. Nobody ever called me anything else, Reverend. Then they're not, just Reverend, which is actually an adjective, not a noun, but never mind. And he said, as we conclude, would you lead us in a prayer of the Presbyterian sort? Yes, and of course the response is, remember, I'm still on the clock. The response is, thank you very much, I appreciate that. Yes, I'd be happy to. And he said, now please tell us, do you kneel? Or what should we do, because this is unknown to us? And it flashed through my mind to say, well, ordinarily we stand on our heads. Would be a short way off the payroll. But you see, I know I'm making fun, but you know me, I'm not being spirited at all. I couldn't help it, it just went through my head. Fortunately, it did not come out yet. It took me years to perfect that filtration system, but yes. But I was so touched. I don't know that I would say to a guest in my home, well, now we're not Buddhists, but we do this in prayer and whatever. And But sitting around the table are a bunch of billionaires who have gone to some of the finest schools in this country. But one is Carl Lindner, who owns Marriott Corporation. This guy's worth a little scratch, you know? And they don't know how Presbyterians work. It's so insular, it's hard to describe how insular the leadership of the LDS is. And I hope you hear that the way I intended, not as criticism, just as description. And I was touched. Sister Darlene was with me for the rest of the time, and by the third day, we were kind of friends. I mean, she was trying very hard. From her point of view, I was a big shot from New York. I know this is hard for you. But from her point of view. And so she was very kind of acutely aware that in my line of work, people are very lettered. They go to a lot of school and so forth. In her line of work, the depth of your faith is what makes you. That's why she has her job. So she probably, I think she was a graduate of Brigham Young, BYU. But anyway, so I said to her, we stopped on the way back from Provo, again in a Gentile town, so I could have some coffee. And we were just sitting in like a little park place. And I said to her, you know, I've asked a million questions. What? Do you have any questions? Do you want to? Well, that's not, you know, the elders will ask you questions. It's not my place. So, yeah, but like they're not here. Right? I wondered, what questions do you? And I was wearing a cross. She said, well, I don't give offense. And you know, I've been everywhere. Listen, you have to really get up early. I mean, I've been offended by the best and the worst. And I said, no, please, but very haltingly, she said, I noticed you were a cross. How can you do that? That's how they killed our leader. Interesting, right? For her, it was the same as like wearing a little guillotine or a little electric chair. Right. And she said, I've never understood that. Well, I grew up in this Scots environment where we were very proud that we wore a blank cross to acknowledge the resurrection, not a crucifix. Right. Because that's what Catholics did. And aren't we so much more advanced than the Catholics? So this was my only, but I've never forgotten that. For her, it was the same as wearing a little guillotine or something around your neck. And then, you know, I started to, pay attention. And of course, the angel Moroni with the trumpet is at the top of every temple on the cross. So it's just really interesting. And there's a historian, and if you're interested in the Mormons, the very best book you can read is by a woman named Jan Shipps. That's SHIPPS. Karen, would you just Google Jan Shipps and find out what the title of her book is about Mormons? She is a Gentile, that is to say, I think she's a Methodist, but she's she might not even be living in it, but she was a scholar at Purdue University, and even the Mormons say that she's a careful outsider. If you Google information on the LDS, most of what you get will be written by the LDS. And there you have to be very, very careful, because some words that you read, you'll think you understand and you don't. When you read baptism, you think you know what that means. And it doesn't mean the same thing. in LDS doctrine. So Jan is writing to the rest of us.
Her first book was Mormon, the story of a new religious tradition,
Yes, that's it.
published by the University of Illinois. And then she wrote Sojourner in the Promised Land, 40 Years Among the Mormons, in which she interweaves her own history of Mormon watching.
Yeah, it's the first one.
What's the name of that book?
Mormonism, the story of a new religious tradition.
It's really a fascinating book, and Jan is very, very, very good. And she was I became the chair of this dialogue, and we hired Jane to be with us, and so that we have some idea what we're doing. So anyway, so then the leaders, the two of you know, probably, Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, we'll talk about them at some length. It's a restoration concept. Religions can begin several ways. In fact, a friend of mine who teaches at Harvard Divinity School gives his students only one question on the final exam, and that is to invent a religion, but it can't be a derivation of anything that exists, which is a very, very hard exam question. But anyway, it's a restoration concept. That means it is not a renewal. It means it's restoring, putting back into place something that has been lost. And so that's the restoration. So what does that mean? And we'll see in a minute. Joseph Smith came to the conclusion that after the death of the apostles, now I mean the actual apostles, the 12, after their death, Christianity fell into disrepute, or apostasy, as we say. Apostasy is faithlessness and corruption. And so the gospel of Jesus Christ was lost to the world. That the authentic living out of the gospel of Christ. So when you ask why do we not have bilaterals with the Mormons? Well, there's one very good reason. Because they look you in the eye and with kindness say, well, you're not really a Christian, you know. You've been in the legacy of apostasy for 2,000 years. Well, it's a little hard to swallow. It's a little bit like saying, let's talk woman to woman. You're not. Well, how do I get an equal footing here? So that's very important. Now, the caution regarding the language baptism, I'm giving you an example. Here's another example. Mormons say, and this is another part of that incident, in the ecumenical movement where I spent my life, we speak only disparagingly of proselytism. Proselytism, or sometimes we call that rice Christians. When you go to a bunch of starving people and you say, well, we have plenty of rice to just come to worship on Sunday. Afterwards, we will have a meal. Well, people come because they're hungry for rice. And they keep coming back because you have made rice Christians. And the West is famous for doing this, and proselytism is also often sheep stealing. Missionaries in the Middle East, for example, never were very successful at converting Muslims, but they converted a very long Greek Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, and Syrian Orthodox, because one, it's not too far to go. I mean, you know, you have Easter and Christmas and so forth in Orthodox, but then you move over to this Protestantism, NG, and the Presbyterians were the greatest offenders of this. And if you do well in our school, we'll send you to Westminster College in Pennsylvania to get a bachelor's degree, and they did. Hundreds and thousands.
Right.
Well, with coercion anyway. Now, the LDS uses the word proselytism all the time. And they have no objection to it. The mainline denominations use the word evangelism, which suggests celebrating the gospel but without coercion. Now, mind you, as I've just said, they often had a lot of coercion that might even been subliminal to them. But the LDS will say without reservation, their missionaries go out to proselytize. And if you look up proselytize, maybe do that, it will probably say something like coercion or corrupt purposes or something like that. So this is where every now and then they'll use a word that is like an anathema to us. And they say it just like it was it's very hard because you really are in few situations where you need an English to English translator. But this is one of those situations that you really need an English to English translator. All right, so let's talk about, let me stop there. Any kind of intro questions of it's kind of interesting though.
So I don't know how you answer about the cross.
Well, I just told the truth that that my tradition uses the cross without a Christ figure on it, a symbol of the resurrection, not a symbol of the crucifixion. And she said, well, what about the crosses that have Jesus on the cross? I said, well, I can't speak for that. Tradition doesn't do that. But to be fair-minded about it, see, this is the ecumenical game. But to be fair-minded about it, I think our friends who wear crucifix would say that it's a constant reminder of the salvation through Christ's suffering. And but neither one is celebrating the suffering of Christ, which I think is kind of a textbook answer, and it's certainly the right answer. That's why I said it.
Was she satisfied?
Well, if she wasn't, she'd never let me know. I mean, I'm a big shot from New York. He barely got the question. So, no, humanism and interfaith relations is a form of the church diplomacy. And so, our manners are rather polite. No matter what goes through your head, just.
What, I mean, the only Book of Mormon I know was the show, and I thought it was wonderful, hysterical. What's in but what's the book, what is in the Book of
Yeah, we're
Mormon?
gonna get right to that.
Okay,
Good.
I think I when I'm home,
I'm
I'll bring
sorry.
it next week. I didn't think about it.
They're in every single Marriott. If you ever go to a Marriott, they want you to take it.
Yeah.
So we accomplished it.
It's in area, yeah.
Folks,
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah.
Inquiring minds will- I haven't read it.
So I never looked, I never opened it, I've seen it there.
Then you never open the
Joseph Smith was born in Vermont in 1805, and because of a crop failure, the family moved to Palmyra, which is west between Rochester and Buffalo, kind of, and a little bit south. So Palmyra, New York. His mother was a Presbyterian. I don't know about his father. He had some acquaintance with Methodism in that little town of Palmyra. When he was 14 years old, very important. Western New York State was known at the time, this is the midst of the Second Great Awakening. This was a time when for the second time in the nation's history, there was a great swelling of religious sentiment. think of camp meetings and,
Revival.
sort of revival tents, those of you who read Lincoln Highway.
Right.
That's the kind of, Amy Semper, there's in, this is the era. And Western New York State is known by church historians as the burned over district. You can Google that sometime and read about it. But the burned over district, so some of the things you would know is, the Oneonta community. There were a lot of existential and sort of communitarian, commune type living in Christian names, and my husband came from a town called Canandaigua, which is right on right in that area, right near Palmyra. And the very first time I went to visit his father, I don't know what how we got to talking about it, but my father-in-law said, "Oh, well, I have a book about Jemima, but I haven't read it in years and years." And he gave it to me, and of course, you know, meeting people who are going to be my in-laws, so yes, I'm very interested. So it was a fascinating story of a Black woman who somehow had gotten educated, and so started a community in Rochester. And Rochester was a stop, the last American stop on the Underground Railroad. That was very interesting stuff. So this was the burned over district. So this is a young Joseph Smith, not educated except at his mother's feet. She taught him to read early on. He certainly read scripture. And as a boy of 14, he was very troubled by which of the churches was the true church of Jesus Christ. And so at age 14 in 1820, he has the first vision. And very often in Mormon anything, Mormon places, restaurants, certainly in the office building there in Salt Lake, Mormon homes. And you've probably seen it. It's a picture of a grove of trees, and there's a young boy in kind of 1830s, but you know, suspended, looks like an Amish kid, you know, in the grove. That's a picture of the first vision that Joseph Smith had. And in that vision, God the Father appeared to him. He was praying, which one? Please tell me which one. And two personages appeared to him in this vision. One was God the Father, who pointed to the other one and said, "That is my son. He is the one to follow." Which one? Which of the churches? And God the Father, the Heavenly Father, said, "None of that." And this is what launches Joseph into his calling. 3 years later, he is once again praying, and the angel Moroni comes to him. And Moroni says to him that because of the goodness of his heart and the earnestness, persistence of his dedication to trying to find the right path, she has some golden plates that will have a New Testament, not small n, a New Testament, not the New Testament, a New Testament of Jesus Christ. There's another visitation of, we're not going to get way into the weeds here, but there's another visitation, and he goes to Hill Pomona. And you can go visit there, and they, on some day, I think it's in March, they reenact the finding of the golden plates. And I mean, this is just a country hill, 20,000 people. That's just unbelievable. And on Hill Pomona, Joseph Smith digs where he's told by the angel Moroni. And he discovers some golden plates, which he's told to go to Noah. And then the angel Moroni, not at all, you need to know. What you need to know. I'm gonna have a pop up soon.
Are we still in New York?
Yeah, we're Palmyra, the Hill Moore is just outside of Palmyra. It's just a hill outside of, yes,
It's Gomorrah or?
come on, see.
But he's not allowed to show anybody the place?
That's right. He gets the instruction of where the plates are, he digs them up, and he's told, he looks at them and they're written in some kind of hieroglyphs. And the angel Moroni, shows him two seer stones. Now those have two names, Thurman and then Tuman. Oh, good, thank you. I mean, thank you on her. Thank you for being on this, whatever. Oh, good. So he has, these are seer stones, that same word, prophet, seer, and revelator, these are seer stones. They are kind of two crystals. And Joseph takes them back to his home. Remember, he's 17 years old.
I was just gonna ask you that. but, yeah.
All right, come on, we can do math here. He's born in 1805. This is 1823. 1823. And he has these two seer stones. And he goes back, and then for the next several years, he and some close friends, one of whom is a man named Cowerley, and another whose name is Sidney Rigdon. Two important early believers. And then there's a lady, and I've forgotten her name, but and he puts a blanket up, and he and the seer stones sit behind the blankets with the golden place. And the seer stones are like eyeglasses, you know, one for each eye. And then he can read the hieroglyphs. And he dictates the Book of Mormon. And they are his secretaries. Now, no matter what you think, no matter what you believe, that is a remarkable accomplishment for a 17-year-old who has never gone to school. So before you, I mean, again, I'm trying to suggest to you the rules of diplomacy here. You know, we don't need to challenge things. We just need to try to understand. If nobody else saw the plates, well,
What did he do with them?
well, later, after he gets the Book of Mormon written, Moroni takes them back, in a sense, back to heaven. Moroni comes back, takes the gold plates, and speaks to heaven. There are some accounts that say that on occasion, Sidney Rigdon saw the golden plates. But he is such a confidant and friend of Joseph Smith that, you know, the seer stones, I mean, I don't know what to make of it. It's like something you see on Saturday morning cartoons, right? I mean, we think of places, it's in a different language, and they look through a stone and they can read it. All of that understood. This young kid dictated the Book of Mormon. What is the Book of Mormon? It's the story of two lost tribes of Israel, the Nephite and the Lamanites. Didn't I put that down there someplace? Neophytes and Lamanites. And this is a story from some 2,000 years before the Common Era. And the Nephites and the Lamanites journey to North America. You're looking at me like I've lost my marbles. Uh, And they make friends with the indigenous population who are barbarians in a sense. Well, I think in 2000 BCE, everybody's kind of a barbarian, but I guess they're great Asians. They're there. And these are faithful to the God of Abraham. And they receive word of the Christ story, so then the Christian story comes into it, and that the Lamanites and the Nephites are killed in the 5th century. They're wiped out, and so there's no trace of them.
Who killed them?
The aforementioned barbarians.
So they took a boat.
No, I didn't say boat.
Well,
I
they
said
got
they
there
journeyed.
some,
I said they journeyed.
what house do you get from Israel to North America?
Practice.
See, I don't know of a boat journey in the Book of Mormon. I've read the Book of Mormon, but to tell you the truth, it was so hard. First of all, it's written like the King James Bible. And so, you sort of the these and the thous and the all whilst where's your mouth out just and you're reading silently. I don't remember the details. And in fact, I wasn't very good at reading it because I just couldn't kind of remember who was who and what was up.
In their doctrine, is it illegal to put it into today's New English version, or does it have to stay in whatever it was written? So they can't
Can be
rewrite
Like the
the book.
Quran,
Yeah.
it is in the original language, and that's it, period.
So it's unhelpful.
That's how we got led astray
Mhm.
by.
Yes.
And anyway, so this is the primary, or what we call the origin story of a religion. And so he dictates the plates, and so the first vision is in 1820. By 1830, the Book of Mormon was published in Palmyra, New York, for the first time. And the structure of the church is evolving. And so he's got a bunch of believers. This is the burned over district of New York. So everybody's a religious fanatic of one brand or another. So it's not like this is, I mean, it's out of the ordinary. Yeah, it's out of it. But a religious fervor and religious emotionalism are the spirit of the day. It's like cultural. Well, my mother was a young woman that they used to drink gin gimlets. Well, you don't see that much. I mean, you can get a gin gimlet if you order a gin gimlet, but it's not a Tom Collins. People don't much drink that anymore. Well, this is a cultural thing. All religions, very emotional. Altar calls, come to Jesus. And so these people are a little kookier than the Presbyterians, a little more kooky than the Methodists, but everybody's a little kooky, so it doesn't stick out so much. But this proselytism, tell the story of the golden plates, is very pronounced. So they begin sending missionaries out. And where do they send them? They send them not to their neighbors who are also being praised, with their religious excess. They send them to the British Isles. And at that time, the US government is very eager to have anybody come to settle the land. We're trying to move westward and secure land. So talk about open border. I mean, there's no kidding, open border. So if you wonder why so many Mormons are fair-haired and light-skinned, it's because they are largely descended from people from the British Isles. far more than the population as a whole. And not the Irish, by the way, because they don't speak English. We're speaking primarily Scotland. And you know, the Welsh are inscrutable at the best of times. But they sing like angels. So you see, it acquires the gold plates, the seer stones, and begins the translation. The Book of Mormon recounts this history, and it contains the basics of the LDS belief and the role of spirit children. Now, one of the things that's an anathema to LDS is that some cultural anthropologists have sought to explore whether there is archaeological evidence of the civilization of these Lamanites and Ephraimites, and have found no trace of them, which feels like a repudiation of their gospel. But again, nobody's asking you to judge the veracity of anybody else's religion. Remember, there are a lot of people in the world who, like, he was dead 3 days and he lives again. That just doesn't happen. I'm sorry, it doesn't happen. Is that well-known law of science? Doesn't happen. Well, you are looking at me like that. I've taken
No,
sense.
no.
It's hard enough to find surviving Native American sites, let alone something from 5th century that, you know, because it was just destroyed by people. Anyway,
Yeah.
so.
Well,
But that doesn't really mean it didn't exist. It just means that nobody could find it.
yeah,
If it was.
but remember, we find dinosaur bones.
Well, it's true,
And
arrowheads.
yeah, and that boat that got across the
I have
shore.
a question about the age of Moroni.
yeah,
Does that Moroni appear, I mean, like Gabriel appears in our Testament and in Islam, but does Moroni appear
well, yeah,
anywhere?
that's a good question. I would say Moroni has that. You know, in a play, if we were talking about theater, there's somebody, maybe not a main character, that's the pipe. Who comes in and brings word of something
Right.
and helps the plot move along. And you know, it's not an important character. Oh, well, I was just in town and I heard that Joe Doe was killed. And that moves the plot along. Well, Moroni, Gabriel are those kind of messengers or pipes in the advancement of the story. And so, yes, Moroni is kind of a the problem I always want to caution people is it's really easy to make equivalencies. Moroni is like Gabriel, and then it sticks in your head, and so you think you understand when you don't quite. Moroni is also unique in that I mean, you might say she's more like Moses, who comes down from the mountain with the text. So it's
Moroni, the female, which never heard you say she.
yes.
I didn't know.
Is the Book of Mormon really considered like a New Testament type of? Because it's taking place from what, 1800s, or is it referencing?
Well, it is a new. That in the sense, it is a New Testament. I mean, what you're asking is really a highly technical question.
Didn't know that.
I know you, and you didn't even mean that, but I'm trying to
Right,
explain how this works. It's new in the sense that it's in their minds supplants the other. It is a New Testament of Jesus Christ. The other one didn't work. Fell into apostasy. This is the New
a
Testament.
latter day version of it, so to speak. Okay.
That's right. And so in that sense, it's new. It's also a New Testament in the sense that its content is not altogether harmonious with the Testament that we know is the New Testament of James.
It's amazing to me at his age that he could get this published. Because,
Well, I think the whole thing is pretty
but
remarkable.
I mean, it couldn't have been inexpensive to publish something back then. And the fact that he was young and he had backing to do this, and then had these people to send over to the English Isle.
Well, but that's why I tell you about the burned over district. This is the second great awakening. Religion is the talk of the town or every place. And religious fervor, I would say, is you know, there's, I mean, who knows about the Quakers at this time, like the praying quietly, who knows even they're there. Everybody is very extravagant in their religion, and people put their resources into it. It's a big thing, but it's a remarkable. Whatever you think of the LDS, whatever you think of Joseph Smith, whatever you think of Seer Stones and Golden Plates and Hill Cumorah, this is a remarkable 17-year-old that somehow does this. And he collects around him his friends, his family, in this little town, and says, we have to go create a new Zion. And to that end, they moved to what we know as Ohio. At that time, it's known as the Western Reserve of Connecticut. Don't ask me why. That's the US Survey Office's title. It's the Western Reserve of Connecticut. And they go off to Ohio to try to establish them. They send people to the British Isles. So he then begins to organize the church, and he becomes the prophet, seer, and revelator. He's got the 12 apostles. These are all men, with women need not apply in this office. And the quorum of the 70 counselors. And that's sometimes referred to, that quorum of 70 is referred to in the Bible. There's, I think in the book of Acts, there's a reference to the 70. So that picks it up from the book of Acts. That's sometimes referred to as the first presidency. It's sometimes the people individually are called general authorities. And then later, as the church develops, each one of those people in the quorum of 70 is like the general authority for Australia, or the general authority for states north of the Mason-Dixon and east of the Mississippi, or whatever. So they have geographic, like bishops, kind of, but big territories. So the church is both drawn because it wants to go someplace where they can thrive. So that means West in this era in American history. And they're also pushed. Their very success makes them unpopular with the baptism and Presbyterians. You know, imagine somebody comes to town, and pretty soon St. Mary's is closing, this church is closing, Calvary is closing, because there's this big successful new thing. Well, there are surely some people who don't go to the big successful new thing, but stay at the old thing and are mad as hornets that what they know been decimated by this. So they are both drawn and put into Ohio, where they try to establish. Now, as I say, Ohio at the time is the Western Reserve of Connecticut, and Connecticut is famous for its pretty bedrock Puritan heritage. And they lose no time in saying, you can stay, but that religion's got to go. Well, that's not. So they moved to Missouri. And in Missouri, they are really in conflict with others around them. I mean, armed. Now we're in the West, and everybody carries a gun because you've got to carry a gun. And so we're not just trading barbs in the local newspaper. Exchanging lead. So then they moved to Illinois, to a town called Commerce, Illinois. And they moved there, and Joseph Smith renames the place Nauvoo from a Hebrew word. He said it was a Hebrew, now it's not actually a Hebrew word, but often Joseph Smith says, and using the Hebrew word, whatever, like the seer things, says, look, I call them by two Hebrew words, Uman and Thermi. Well, those are not Hebrew words. But you'll never get that past the LDS. I mean, they are Hebrew words that just, well, you know, I'm not a linguist, I'm sort of just the facts, man, you know? So, they moved to Commerce, they rename it, Nauvoo, and it really gets out of hand. And their printing press is destroyed, which is really the solution of is their proselytism device. There's a lot of conflict. He and his brother are charged, that is Joseph Smith and his brother are charged. They ride to Carthage, a different town, to stand trial for this civil disobedience, of assault, whatever the charge, and the mob kills Joseph Smith. So the first prophet, seer, and revelator is dead. And it was great tumult. Now I should have said, as early as Missouri, one of the most loathsome things is the practice of polygamy that's bothering people. I mean, you know, other religions believe, you know, things that seem crazy to others. But polygamy is a little beyond the pale of just another kind of religious practice. And so that's really at the heart of this. And so Brigham Young, who's one of the followers, takes charge of this flock, which is growing every day with these immigrants from the British Isles. And so the names, they are peasant English names, the names Spencer, Kimball, Hamilton, they just the most British names that you, Whitefield, Whitfield, Salisbury, these are just British folk. And so they set off for the West. Where in the West, they don't know. Just, we got to get past US territory, because the polygamy gets us into legal trouble, which is different than just people don't like your religion. Now, at that very moment, there's a split of some people who do not, they find Brigham Young force, which he absolutely is. He's kind of an LDS Davy Crockett kind of guy. Kind of a frontiersman thing. Okay. Do you know who Steve Bannon is? Yeah. Steve Bannon is a spitting image of Brigham Young if he had longer hair. I mean, big, coarse, and a little sloppy, and only has, you know, 5,000 decibels, only speaks in a shout, and it's a little scary. Some people don't think that that's the right way, and they form the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they moved to St. Louis, where they are to this day. They have renamed themselves just at the beginning of the 21st century as the Community of Christ, because it didn't help them to be associated with it. Yes. And so that's their first, as we say, schism. And then the rest move out, and they trek and trek and trek. And finally, And there are lots of bad things, that they're attacked by people. They're killed. They kill people, they steal food. The government is after them, then they get into territory that's unclaimed. And finally, the 148, and this is very important to the elders, 148 pioneers with Brigham Young come to a place in the high plains, and they're overlooking the Salt Lake Valley. And Brigham Young says, this is the place. So they go and they plant their crops, and the rest of them come, and the crops come to, what do you say, fruition? But you needn't stand it, so. Thank you, I'm teasing you. And see, sometimes it does come. I want to go through my head. So they plant their crops, they're all there. This looks like a solution because it's outside, it's not part of a state, it's part of the United States. Virgin territory. And locusts come. And there's about 12,000 of them now in the Salt Lake Valley. This is the first year of the crop. And the locusts come, and in the first day they eat some portion of the crop. And this is serious because, you know, where are we going to go? Who's going to feed us? So the saints pray. They gather at the Salt Lake and they pray. And while they're praying, seagulls come and eat all the locusts, and the crop is preserved. Wow. So, if you go to Salt Lake, there's first of all, they have Pioneer Days, which are in the summer. And people reenact this whole thing with Conestoga wagons. It's really very festive, and they're so joyful, and they so honor the pioneers. If you go to that bluff, which is, I think Snowbird, or is that the name of?
Yeah.
Snowbird, yeah. On the way up to Snowbird, over to your right, is a beautiful statue of an ox cart, Brigham Young, and some, it's a bronze statue, and it's the pioneers. Oops, see. The story of the locust and the seagulls is its historicity is indisputable. It did happen. Now, think how far an ocean is from. But seagulls came. So this was evidence, and from there, the LDS, the saints begin to create their Zion. And the church catches fire in many, many ways. Later, they have to give up polygamy in order to gain statehood. And so it's given up, but reluctantly so. And there's the second schism. And the second schism are the fundamentalist LDS that gravitate south. I can't remember the name of that town.
St. George.
No, I don't remember. I was gonna say St. Joseph, but maybe you're
Where
right.
is the St. George?
But anyway, they migrate south. They retain polygamy, and they are not associated with the LDS. But those two denominations that are offspring, the Community of Christ, now called the Community of Christ, reorganized, and the fundamentalists use these same books, the Book of Mormon, the D&C, and the Pearl of Great Price. But they only use the original Pearl of Great Price, not the more contemporary revelations from Kimball and the subsequent prophets, seers, and revelators. So that's where it is now. In Hawaii, maybe 30 years ago, well, my kids are 40, so yes, 30 years ago, we were in Hawaii, and there's something called the Polynesian Village. And the Polynesian Village is kind of an amusement park, but it tells all the stories of Mormonism. And so there's like a ride that's like the Hill Tomorrow. It's like, very hard to explain. We went and we took our kids, and we were trying to say to our kids, look, it's fun, but, and you know, Hawaii, the air is soft, the weather is good, you know, you get hot and then there's a shower and it cools you right off, and, oh, yeah, it's really lovely. And so we're singing, and every place that you go, I mean, of course you can't have folks, but you have some very healthy tree. And then there's smiling missionaries every place, and everything's free, and so. When you go out, yeah, literature, and they ask you to sign up. Somebody will come by your hotel and talk with you some more about Mormonism if you like. You know, and so our kid, and I never forget when we left there, we said, kids, look, you know, that was good fun. But, you know, that's not really what we believe in. And, so do you understand, boys? Well, Andrew, who's a college professor now. Yes, I understand. Well, okay, but where's the Presbyterian amusement park? Oh, we don't have. So anyway, that's the background. We'll talk about theology, and if you thought today was a an eye opener, wait till we get to the theology. That said, I have never been. I've been a lot of places with a lot of religious communities. I have never been treated more kindly or with a more welcoming attitude than among the Mormons. Now, that's partly because I only staying for a little while. You know, I mean, I understand that I was an official, so, but I do have both respect and affection for them. I mean, I'll never get over Elder Irene saying, and we do need this in prayer and a Presbyterian side. No pope, no patriarch has ever said that to me.
You have to respect somebody who gives up everything and goes on a mission for, like you work for a surgeon, right? It was eye surgeon.
Eye surgeon, and he gave up a year to go work for a mission, and then he had to come back,
It wasn't to go do eye surgery, it was to be a missionary.
which he had wanted to do, you know, go to a foreign country, you know, South American country or whatever. He had to come back and get, you know, take continuing education, or whatever they call it, to get recertified, because he hadn't practiced.
No, it's extraordinary. Well, I'll tell you this one last story. There's a very famous place. Now, the institution's there. There's a 20-story building, which is the headquarters. There's the temple. There's the tabernacle, which is where Gentiles, you know, us, can go in and hear the Mormon tabernacle choir practice and hear the great organ. There's BYU, Brigham Young University. And then in Provo is the Mission Training Center. And my friend Darby took me to the Provo Training Center. And in fact, they had me schedule my dates so that I could be at this, they call it delivery day, that literally 600 or 700 families delivered their sons, just sons in those days, to Provo with a what do you call those boxes? Foot loggers, with everything that's in there is prescribed, and nothing that isn't prescribed is in there. And they don't know where they're going. And they come and they put their stuff away, and then they come into this auditorium. So she took me into the auditorium. And I think I can, well, one, I'm the mother of boys, so I would probably a little vulnerable to this. But this guy speaking, you know, we're so proud of you, we raise your children well. They've come here to be missionaries, and oh, the kids are all sitting over here in the parents' house. And you know, they're gonna serve the Lord for 2 years. Tonight they will learn where they're going and they'll start their language study. And they'll study for, I mean, we really don't know, they could be going to Milwaukee, or they could be going to the Dominican Republic. And if they need a language, they. And if they're going to an English speaking place, they spend their time while the others are doing language study for 6 weeks, making phone calls or telephonic processing. And so they say all this, and they said, well, don't worry, because the Lord will protect them. If they take ill, we have provisions for healthcare and so forth. And they will be able to call on Mother's Day, which is an interesting thing, Mother's Day. And I can't remember if it's Christmas or Easter, but it's one or the other, and not both, one or the other, and Mother's Day. And say, well, all right, everybody stand up and face each other. They face each other. And they say, elders is talking to the young men, tell your parents you love them. And it's the soul. I love them. And parents, tell your children that you love them and wish for God to be with them. And then a wall comes up between the two, and they don't see for 2 years.
Wow.
I don't know how you can sit in that and not say, "Look, I tried." You know, my mother always used to say, I don't never say you're a Christian, say you're trying. You know, don't claim something you want. I'm trying, but I don't know if to do that. I don't know if to do that with my son. And the parents pay for the whole thing. They pay for the transportation, they pay. Well, it's no wonder that church grows. But it's a remarkable, in fact, we came away from there, we came out. And there's this board of the pastor just could hardly walk past all it. These are parents crying and congratulating each other. You know, it's like a wedding, you know, where people are congratulating each other and crying. And you can't control whether it's happy or sad. And the kids, we went off, we had lunch, we came back, and then they took me around to see what the kids were doing. And I mean, kids, they're it's between high school and college. Few of them are between college and whatever comes next, but most of them are 18. Now, parenthetically, about 10 years later, my friend Henry Eyring, who is now an apostle, meaning he's probably in line to be with the prophets here in Revelation, had his staff call me and asked me who among the churches would be confidential and safe, and so because homosexuality had become a problem with missionaries, and where could they get some help that it wouldn't get to the press. And I mean, this is what church diplomacy does. We try to, and I did make some phone calls for them and got referred some people to them and so on. And then Elder Eyring told me, and this man is so accomplished. And he said to me, you know, I just don't know how the devil got into this. I said, you know, Henry, I mean, by this time we were friends. We've been friends for a decade. So, I think it is, or I guess he asked me, what do you think? Well, I think that people are sexual beings. And in any single sex organization, especially under duress, in the military, in nursing schools, whatever, homosexual behavior appears. Don't do that. Good. Yeah, yeah, now they're all women, but they don't go to the same missions, you know. And, but there's a naive, I mean, what I just said is no revelation, no genius, right? I mean, it's just any idiot. would know. I mean, anybody that's paying attention to. And he's, well, he would have to think about that, you know, I was making a very good point. But if that's the case, what were they to do? And there's a naivete there that is, I took to talk to one of my colleagues, I said, you know, I mean, I don't know how to help. Because it's like, do you not know the world? Or do you not know what's like going on?
I don't think they do. I think they're so isolated. So isolated in their own little world. That's all that, you know, when we saw the kids, they are too friendly. Like when you're walking in Salt Lake City or in the temple or wherever you are, they're just so friendly. Like, oh, come on, the world isn't, you can't be that great of a day, you know, or something. Like, it was just very strange to be among them.
And I wonder if they'd be as concerned about homosexuality as they would be concerned about non-marital relations.
Extra, or.
Yeah,
premarital.
yeah. Right. So,
I don't know,
they're just,
or
I agree. Not going on.
He said the kids were playing together after they first moved there, it was great, and all of a sudden,
They get to
one day
do-
they said, they're not like us.
Right.
They're not allowed to play with them.
right,
Not talk to them or anything.
yeah.
Well, and it,
You got
Park City is a Gentile town. And, yeah, and that's really a comfortable place, but, Orem is a completely LDS town, and you feel like you're visiting your great, you know, don't touch anything.
It really was, right.
Well, anyway, next week we'll talk about theology. Hope I
All
didn't
right,
make you
and
crazy.
remind me to bring that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
is the polygamy mentioned in the